buddy. I'm ready for some Utena tonight. Hey, it's Romania Black. I'm ready for some Revolutionary Girl Utena because last week was bonkers. Last week, episode 8 did not let us down. It was absolutely bonkers. And what's so funny is that I've started to get some comments, and I don't think people realize that I've watched episode 8 at this point, and some of the comments were like, man, yeah, Nanami and her relationship with animals. I was like, maybe it's going to be a reoccurring theme that Nanami is just pestered by animals of all different species this entire series. What can we do? But that episode was just wild. It was bonkers in the best way. I laughed so hard. But looking at the previews, it seems like we're going to get back into some more like crazy in a more serious manner of episode content. So I'm really excited about that, let me tell you. But that's what we're going to get into. I've got a couple comments I want to talk about before we dive into episode 9. Alex Tapasevic notes that Dios in Spanish means God. And I was like, yeah, it's really interesting. I think of Bleach when I think of Japanese anime using Spanish because Tite Kubo used Spanish a lot in some of the character designs, mainly of the antagonists. So that's interesting. But yeah, Dios meaning God in Spanish, mainly being the power of Dios, being the power of God. So it's this ethereal power that is bestowed upon Anthe. And we've established that the end of the world is a place. So things are slowly merging and coming together, which is fun, which is a fun time. We'll see where that goes. And then H Banana 7 talks about how in Asian cultures, sometimes they attribute food being cold to being bad for one's stomach. And they kind of talked a story about that in relation to their experiences. Because I don't think in the culture that I'm here in the Midwest US, we don't really have anything like that. It's like anything that involves, mayonnaise or things that are kind of dairy based, you got to be careful with those because if they're not properly stored and stuff, they can make you sick. But I've never really heard about that with cold foods causing like a stomach ache. But I like my food to heat it up and hot, so maybe that's why. But that's interesting, very interesting. And then X Zhang points out from episode 4 with Mickey and the music notes he had saying simile on it. I was looking at simile in terms of like an English side of things where simile is a comparison. But in music, apparently, it refers to a specific passage being played similarly to a previous one. And so that's kind of like the metaphor comparison. So that's interesting. I like getting a little bit of music. Unfortunately, my music program at my school, because we were a podunk school in the middle of nowhere, my music program got cut when I was in junior high. So I'm not very fluent in music or things having to do with music. And it's never really been like one of my major interests because it was just cut out very early on in school, which is really sad. But I like learning about it. It's interesting. So that's cool. And then both Bernard Black 7870 as well as Oliver Jajado both point out that Jury's VA. I was like, their voice sounds familiar, but I don't know where it's from. And I really like that voice. Jury's VA is like an amazing voice actress. Plays Masato from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Plays Mei in Jujutsu Kaisen. Plays Boa Hancock in One Piece, but maybe most notably, she's just the voice of Usagi from Sailor Moon. I was like, oh my gosh! And I think that is such a testament to her power as a voice actress, because Usagi in Sailor Moon is very ditzy and very like oh my gosh, like very manic and ditzy and teenage girl, and then you have her playing not only that character but a more mature younger woman like Juri, but then like a woman like Masato and Mei, and then also playing, Boa Hancock. So she kind of runs the spectrum of playing these women of different ages and personalities and dispositions. She's not a typecast voice actress, and I think that's really, really cool, which is awesome. They also note, Oliver Jajado also notes that Mickey's voice actor is a voice actress, and they play Amy in Sailor Moon. And I was like, okay, that voice tracks now. I can hear Amy. They also play Rim from the 1997 Trigun, which I was like, awesome. Nice. So a stellar voice cast, stellar voice actors all around. Super, super cool. I really appreciate those comments and learning about the behind the scenes stuff, because if I go to try to look any of this up myself, there's going to be spoilers, especially a series that's been out as long as Revolutionary Girl Utena. If I looked up any of this, they'd be like, did you know in episode 47? Then I'll be like, no, even though there's not 47 episodes. Sadly, that's where we're at. But I'm super excited. I hope you all are as well. But we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right into Revolutionary Girl Utena, episode 9. It feels like it's Saionji centered, which we haven't had Saionji in the series in a while, so I'm super excited about that. But let's see what we get, shall we? We're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do it to it, Lars. This episode came for me. This episode came for me. This episode was like, oh, you have a whiteboard behind you? You have a whiteboard that you can write out shit with to talk about this episode and the character development, the mystery, and the things we're not going to explain to you and the unanswered questions? Oh, strap yourself in, girl. I was just sitting there, and as the episode kept going and it kept getting more and more crazy, I was like, it felt like my eyes were stuck open in Clockwork Orange and I had to watch. I was like, and I couldn't stop. I kept wanting to stop and be like, but this and this and this. So y'all wanted a twist, eh? Here's one thing. I've had several people and I've told my moderators, my moderators are very, very, very good about spoilers and from keeping spoilers away. And that's good because with a show like this, I feel like it can be very hard to explain what's going on without spoiling, because if you've watched the series all the way through and the movie, then of course you know what's going on, or at least you know more than I do. So even the act of trying to explain things can lead to spoilers, because you're like, well, damn it, she's not gotten to this part yet. So things are going to start coming together. And what is so interesting about this story so far, because I have seen some comments that are like, yeah, some things don't ever get explained. And I'm like, yeah. And that's why it reminds me so much of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Neon Genesis Evangelion, you can follow the plot. You can figure out what's going on a surface level. But when you try to dig deep, excuse me, I have some soda went down the wrong throat. Wrong pipe. But there are some bits and pieces of Neon Genesis, for example, and this is not spoiling anything saying this, but there's some things that Anno is not going to answer for you. There are some parts of Neon Genesis that I'm still thinking about and going, was that what it meant? And the funny thing is Anno's like, like the creator is not going to give you answers. There are some parts of that series that are left completely ambiguous. There are hints and clues to kind of make you think it might be this, but there are no concrete answers. And I love that about shows. I feel like we are inundated in an internet culture where there are so many videos that's like ending of this movie explained, or let's explain the plot of this, or how many anime video essays have you watched where it's like, well, here's what the ending of Attack on Titan means, and here's what it actually is. There is an obsession, I feel, with us as humans that we want to understand things, and we want things to have specific meaning. And as an English instructor, I can tell you that the worst section to teach sometimes is poetry. Because with poetry, my students will tell me, they'll say, I just want, like in fiction, most stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have a theme, they have meaning to them. You can understand by the end, you get closure, you close the book and go, all right, that was a fun story, and you move on. Poetry is frustrating to a lot of people because sometimes poets intentionally are like, I just want to get this emotion out and this feeling, and I'm not going to explain anything else. Or there is no meaning. It's just an emotion. It's just a thought. It's just an idea. And I'm not going to give you anything else. And a lot of people and students have told me they get frustrated by it because they want that meaning and control. And when there is none, they're like, well, what do I do with this? And so I feel like whenever authors or mangaka are intentionally vague or don't explain things, people are like, but what's the meaning? And sometimes there is none. And sometimes there is. And sometimes it's left ambiguous purposefully. And so it's like, so going into this episode, there are some elements of unreliable narration that are going on. There are elements where there are things put out there that you're like, but why didn't she mention this? Or why didn't he explain that? And they're not answered yet. And so I want to say, first and foremost, going into this episode, I'm going to be doing a lot of theorizing, a lot of ideas put out there, a lot of, well, why aren't they doing this? And why aren't they doing that? And I am fully aware that, one, my questions may never be answered. There may be plot points of this episode that are never addressed again. They are never touched. They're just left out in the wind. And that's fine. I also am under the impression and know that some of my answers may get answered. Some of my questions may get answered, but it may be 30 episodes down the road. And I am fine with that. That's why I love shows like Utena and shows like Neon Genesis, because you get to sit here and theorize so much. And then you go, okay, well, but what about this? But what about that? And you want to keep watching to see if you get answers. And if you don't get answers, I'm fine with that, because the series has set up from the start that it's going to be weird and that you may not get some answers to questions. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm cool with that. But I want to theorize, and then I'm going to spout off all my nonsense about Saionji and Kiryuu being a match made in heaven and how I love them. And Saionji's won my heart over. Last episode, it was Nanami. This episode, it was Saionji. He has won my heart. We're going to talk about it. I'm like, yes. And Kiryuu, Toga, the moment I heard his voice actor, I was like, you're going to be that character. Because his voice actor during Neon Genesis was very young, and he was relatively young when he did this too, though. So, but this type of role is exactly what that voice actor is known for. That is the type of role that he plays, where it's just like, are you a double agent? You're sinister, but you're charming? Ooh, he's that character you look at and go, ooh, you. And as soon as I heard his voice, I was like, that's it, Dio, done. And I've not been proven wrong with that. So that's so exciting. Okay. We need to dive into this episode. This 20 minutes of madness that is so, so good. So let's dive into this. This is the emptiest courtyard at a high school. I guess they're all in class. And they're all at the dojo watching. Utena's just, casually leaning up against a pillar, reading her book like you do. So there's going to be a duel at the kendo dojo. And all the girls are like, Toga Senpai and Saionji Senpai are at it again. And they've been doing this for 10 years, a duel. The kendo sticks representing the two girls on either side, leaning in and cheering them on, was a really smart move. It was a very simple animation. It has like some symbolism to it. They also look like a bunch of dicks. So, there's phallic symbolism, all of this, I'm not above it. So we need to write down here. We need Saionji here. We need our sweet Saionji. And I like calling him Kiryuu. The thing is, I don't really like calling him Toga because his voice actor plays another character called Toji, and it's too similar, and I'm afraid I'm going to get the names mixed up in discussion. So I like Kiryuu. Kiryuu and Saionji. Although I know Saionji is not his first name, but we're going to roll with it. Humor me. But yeah, Kiryuu is not going to turn down the opportunity to wear an open shirt and expose his chesticles to the world. He's not going to turn that down. No siree. I love the comparison between the both of them, that they both have this long hair. One is green, one is red, which are normally clashing colors, but you see them at Christmas. You see them like, they are colors that go together and they kind of jar a little bit, it's the color of roses. Like, it all makes sense, but Kiryuu's hair is straight, Saionji is curly. They're foils to each other in the best way, shape, or form, right? I just want these two to go at it. I think if they just took an evening, got it out of their system, we would be fine. Here's the thing, though. Saionji's character, I am reading a series called Scum Villain's Self-Saving System. It's a Danmai. It's a Chinese BL. But I'm reading it on my channel right now. You should go check it out. It's a fun time. But there is one of the main characters who also has fluffy curly hair, mind you, reminds me a lot of Saionji. Saionji is a lot like one of the main characters of that series. And as this episode went on, I was feeling more and more sympathetic towards Saionji. and we get more explanation of why his character is the way that he is. And I was like, damn it, I'm kind of falling for Saionji and really feeling sympathetic for his character. And Kiryuu is playing a game, and I'm like, and so we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna this is all gonna break down. Like, Utena, you're great, girl. You're having a great time. I'm gonna need to sit you over here for now, so we can talk about these two. But yeah, Saionji is so passionate, right? And of course, our two girls are like, come on, Toga, come on, Saionji, keep fighting. And I do like that it is established that both of these men have dueled for a decade. They've dueled since they were children, and since they were 7 years old, they've been dueling back and forth. One wins, one loses. Although I could have probably told you that Saionji was probably going to lose this round, because I feel like even when somebody thinks they have the high ground with the sword up here, like, you can get that up there. So I feel like, and Saionji is very impulsive, right? So I want to put down here, Saionji is very impulsive and outwardly emotional and passionate. He's very passionate, emotional, and very impulsive. Meanwhile, with Kiryuu, I would say that Kiryuu sometimes, he can seem detached or passive, right? Seems detached or passive. He is very contemplative, which is kind of the opposite of Saionji. And he seems very secretive at times. We'll talk about that. But also, he seems kind of empty, is, I think, a little bit about him. He has this persona of being, he has this persona of the gentleman and the playboy, which is kind of, you know, sort of seems opposite of each other, right? You know, playboy, you think of being a womanizer, and a gentleman is chivalrous. So it's kind of like it's this persona, but it almost seems like he's neither, right? It almost seems like he's neither. And the funny thing about that is, he says that he's trying to be a gentleman and be nice, but instead, I think inside he's a scoundrel. He's a scoundrel, and AKA dirty inside, and he knows it. And also, instead of being a playboy, I think he's not interested in any of these women. I think he's not interested in any of these women. I mean, I think that Utena is the only exception. But Utena kind of presents as a man, so it's like, she kind of fits right in there. Meanwhile, you know, Saionji comes across as this, you know, studious, I'm going to say athlete for lack of a better word. This studious athlete, and he comes across as being very, what he ends up being in actuality is very vulnerable. But he has this kind of machismo to him at the beginning. But then you find out through this episode, he's actually very vulnerable and insecure in a lot of ways, right? So, I'm so fascinated with both of them. So yeah, then they do this battle, and they're like, beat him at his own game. And we have this little back and forth between them. And then all the girls are in the doorway. I love that the imagery in this episode, the imagery was so good. There were so many moments I was like, I want to take a screenshot of that, and a screenshot of that, and a screenshot of that. They were just great. Like, so many amazing moments throughout this entire episode. I was like, yes, please. But yeah, just getting all the girls in the doorway watching, and they're like, oh, well, Kiryuu's not bad. And I'm like, I guess he's not just a playboy. And it's like, no, Kiryuu is very strategic, and he's got these inside connections that he's not telling people about. I'm very interested. So yeah, the two of them fight, and Saionji loses this round. And they're like, oh, Toga senpai, you're the best. That's my prince. And Utena's like, a prince? you said the P word. Now I'm interested. And it's not the P word that normally gets other women interested. You know, I guess it can work on both ends. Normally, the P word that gets women interested is twofold. But for Utena, there's a third one, and that's prince. But she's like, a prince, wait. And you know what? Back in the day, how many episodes ago, I remember I was being very, very chiding on my discussion, being like, oh, how could Utena think that Kiryuu is her prince when he doesn't even look like that purple-haired prince? Well, now, it could be that we have an unreliable narrator, and Utena's memories are not all that they're cracked up to be. Also want to make note that the girls in the background that are kind of like eyeing them almost look like the Greek choir girls. We'll talk about them. We actually saw skin this time. I was like, ooh, we're getting closer to seeing what they look like, maybe. So I was like, aha. So we're going to put Utena over here. Yeah. So way back when I was all being all like peacockish and being like, oh, why would she think Kiryuu is her prince? Well, now it's like, he very well could be. But he's not. But we're going to talk about this. Utena is an unreliable narrator. We should not rely upon her to be the end-all be-all truth, because again, she lost her family, lost her parents. We'll talk about that third coffin being empty, right? Lost her parents, third coffin empty. Could it be that grief affected her memories? Well, of course. Of course it is. And the thing about it is, we're going to go back and look at that scene, but I don't think she saw. I think her back was turned to Kiryuu and Saionji, so there's a very good possibility that she didn't see either of them. So she doesn't know what they look like. Now, do I think that the guy that gave her the ring is different than Kiryuu? Yes. Do I think that Kiryuu and the guy that gave her the ring are connected now? Yes. But we're going to talk about that. We need to, if I get too far ahead of myself, I'm going to miss something. So we need to go back. But yeah, so she hears the word prince and is suddenly like, And then of course, Kiryuu has like a spider sense when Utena is around. And he's like, oh my. He's like, there's no need to look at me with such hostility, my dear friend. I'm like, these two need to bone in an alley. They need to get it over with, because there could not be more sexual tension between Saionji and Kiryuu. It is palpable. It is there. This is 90s BL. This is a 90s BL that they're just inserting, no pun intended, into this series. So I'm like, ugh. So yeah. So the way, let's describe them. So Kiryuu, he kind of mockingly refers to Saionji as a dear friend. Well, does Kiryuu know that Saionji has a portrait of them in his study? Does he know that? So meanwhile, I'm pretty sure that Saionji believes they are friends. He believes, which earnest, that's the word I'm looking for. He believes earnestly in their history, him and Kiryuu. He's very earnest, right? Like, Saionji probably once carved K plus S equals heart into a tree and stands by it to this day. Kiryuu does not seem to believe in love. He does not seem to believe in these fleeting feelings of... he's going to go on to play a character in Skate the Infinity that embodies the same thing, and I'm like, ah! So, yeah. Who also has... Wait, no, he has blue hair in that series, but still has some red motif there. I'm like, you're basically playing the same character twice, sir. And Saionji's just like, I'm not your friend. Such a tsundere. He believes earnestly in their history, but he is also a tsundere when it comes to it. Yeah. They were childhood friends. And then they became partners. Then they are kind of like in this frenemies position, right? They're in this frenemies. Now all that's left is for them to be lovers. That will complete the tree. Basically, Gege Akutami saw Saionji and Kiryuu and said, I can do that. So that's pretty much what he is. It's the same dynamic. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong. Only those who've watched JJK will know what I'm talking about. He's like, I thought you were my one and only friend. And he's like, oh, well, and I know that Saionji does not want Kiryuu to be mocking him at this point. He does not want Kiryuu to be mocking him. So we're going to talk about this concept of eternity in here. This concept of eternity, and I'm going to put it down for both of them, right? We also find out that Anthe wants eternity. We're going to put her over here and put eternity down for her too, because we talk about it as well with Anthe. But I do love the idea that Saionji, he's treating Kiryuu is the Sasuke to Saionji's Naruto. He's like, I need to get onto his level. I need to catch up to him. I need to get on the same playing field as he is. We need to catch up. It's so damn good. He's like, I'm not going to accept defeat from the likes of you. So the castle said to hold eternity. So supposedly, I'm going to put this castle over here. Supposedly this castle is said to be connected, obviously, and they've said that the entire time. I'm not saying anything new here, but connected to the context of eternity, which is a form of power. So we're going to put that on there. Bam. Bam. I did not, when we watched that preview last week, this was not the direction I thought we were going. Before we dive into this episode any further, I thought last week, based on the preview, that what was going to happen was that Saionji was going to, he was getting all fired up again. He was going to challenge Utena to a duel, and then we were going to go through this all over again, and it was going to be Utena versus Saionji, and the castle was crumbling. So it's like, well, did they do something and it caused the castle to crumble? Because so far she's, Utena's been, enveloped with the spirit of the prince, it seems, but it comes from the castle. So I'm like, well, is her using it too much going to cause the castle to crumble? No. And that's not at all what we got in this episode. So I was pleasantly surprised. So we'll just see where that goes. But yeah, so we're back to the atrium. Anthe's not being bothered at all. Anthe's just trying to live her life, live her best life. She don't care about these fencing boys. And then I was going to talk about the roly-poly, because Choo-Choo, our little resident monkey mouse, is attacking the roly-poly. We have a lot of roly-polies where I'm from. They're very cute, kind of creepy. They're like the cutest bug that I think I can get around. But they're very, for some reason, what kept reminding me of this was that I was looking outside of my house one day, and there was a roly-poly, and all of these ants were swarming it, and the ants were like trying to carry the roly-poly away to like go kill it and eat it. And I was like, oh my God, these ants are terrifying. But it's just the idea of the roly-poly. It withdraws within itself, and it puts up this shell around it to protect itself from outside predators, right? And so I feel, to me, that both Saionji and Kiryuu, to an extent, are kind of like a roly-poly. And I think that Kiryuu, to me, is more like the roly-poly, because Kiryuu puts on this outside exterior of, oh, I'm just this cool playboy. Look at me, I'm a gentleman. Oh, I've got everything together. I know all what we're doing. I'm surrounded by bitches. Everything's great. And I'm like, is it? Or are you just putting on this facade because you're really empty inside and you don't know, there's no fulfillment in your life, right? Is that what it is? We'll talk more about it here in a little bit. And then Saionji puts on the tsundere roly-poly exterior, where he's like, no, I'm a tough man. I'm just here. I'm going to slap Anthe around and get her to do what I want because she's going to help me get eternity. And it's like, you're really an insecure, scared guy who's afraid about the friendships that you're potentially losing, and that you're not going to measure up to the person you admire the most that you've grown up with. So you're trying to catch up to him in the only way that you can, and it's not working. And it's like, I feel like the roly-poly is not just inserted here for no reason. But maybe it is. Who knows, right? And then the moment that the roly-poly, like the moment that Choo-Choo like stops poking the roly-poly and you're like, oh, it's saved, the frog comes and just yoinks it out, right? And just eats it anyway. And I've said this through another series on my channel, but it always reminds me of this one story where I was in high school driving home, and I hate, like, people hit animals on the side of the road all the time, like roadkill, like you hit a possum or you hit a raccoon. I hate it. I will swerve out of the way and nearly kill myself to avoid hitting an animal. But I was driving home from school, and it was just a lone stretch of road. There was nobody coming from miles around, and this squirrel went out into the center of the road, and it just stopped. And I was far enough away that I could slow down, And I was like, come on, squirrel, move. And I literally stopped in the center of the road. There was no traffic coming that day. It was really quiet out. And there was a squirrel there. And I was like, come on, squirrel, move. I don't want to run you over. And I swear to you that all of a sudden, this giant ass hawk just went whoink and grabbed the squirrel out of the road. I was like, I will never forget that. It was traumatizing. I was like, ah! So from that moment on, I just kept driving. I'm like, you're going to have to get out of the way. So this frog moment was exactly that. And then Saionji comes. I love that Saionji has this beef against Chu of all animals. I'm like, Saionji gets so pissed off at this little rodent, at this little monkey. I wondered if it was because of last episode when him and the monkey just traded bodies. If that had anything to do with his feelings. But I'm just like, he's so pissed off at this monkey because Choo Choo gets to live this little life of luxury being around Anthe. And I'm like, Saionji he has a lot of repressed emotions and he has a lot of repressed pent up anger. And he's like, you're being a pain in the ass, always being around Anthe. And I'm like, dude, you just need to relieve some of that tension and Kiryuu needs to help you do that. And I like that Utena's like, how dare you pick a fight with a monkey? She's like, stubbornness is not a good look, senpai. I like that Saionji kind of has the mindset of, Utena, why are you here in the way? And he's like, I will defeat you in our next duel and take Anthe back. And she's like, what is your deal? And he just punts, the bad man punts Choo Choo across the courtyard. I'm like, what did that monkey do to you, sir, other than switch bodies because of Anthe's cooking? And I like Utena a lot, but girl gets some arrogance to her sometimes that I'm like, okay, girl, you better hope you can back this up. It's worked out for you so far, so I'm glad it does. But I have a feeling that there's gonna come a time where there is going to come a moment where this girl is going to be confident and it's going to blow up in her face. I just feel like it's going to happen. It's working out good for her now, but I have a feeling that at some point her confidence is going to blow up because she's just like, well, are you sure you can beat me? I'm like, I mean, that's statistically you're not wrong, but I wouldn't doubt anything. And then she's like, well, you just got your ass handed to you by Toga. And he was like, so he's like, you haven't even fought Toga. So how do you know how he is as a fighter? He's like, he was just lucky. And she's like, you guys have known each other that long? And that's when he gets upset. At first, he's like, well, me and Kiryuu have fought each other for decades. And she's like, you guys have known each other that long? And the way that she said it almost made it feel like she was surprised that they had known each other that long because they didn't seem close. And that's when he kind of gets a little bit of a stern look, like, yeah, I know, we're not as good of friends as we should be because of this whole business. So, and then it cuts back to them, like, practicing in the cherry blossoms, the courtyard, you know. And he's like, I will not lose to him. So, one thing that he is dedicated to is he does not want to stay behind Kiryuu. I could make a reference about tops, but I'm not going to because I have more class. He's like, I will win the Rose Bride. And I like that Utena's like, well, what good's that going to do you? And Utena brings up a really good point. She says, do you really love Himamiya? Because at the very beginning of this series, you know, Utena was like, do you like her? Are you like her boyfriend? What are you doing? And she questioned whether or not, you know, she was questioning their relationship. And now I feel like Utena's been around Anthe long enough and has gotten used to this whole crazy dueling student council business that she's like, do you really love her? Because you're not acting like somebody that really loves her. And she's like, if you do, why are you trying to win her in a duel? So Utena's whole thing is that love is not something won, quote unquote. She would probably say that it's something that you earn instead. It's you earn or that you show, but it's not something that you win. It's like love is not a prize. She's not a trophy wife. You don't win people in love. That's not how this works. So she's like, you know, if you really liked her, just ask her out. Why are you trying to win her in a duel? That's not the same thing. And Utena can say that right now because she doesn't technically, to our knowledge, believe that she loves Anthe. And since Saionji's like, I need to win her by duel so I can triumph over him. Which is so interesting. So his whole thing is that he needs Anthe. Is that he needs to quote unquote win Anthe to beat Kiryuu. So there's clearly some stuff, you know, being set up here. The thing that's frustrating for us, the audience, is that Utena's not asking the right questions, right? She's asking questions. She's getting down to some good details, and I'm glad she's doing it. But there are some specific questions that she's not asking, and it's not that... The thing is, she doesn't know to ask them. We, the audience, are like, well can you ask him about why? But she's not there yet. So he's like, I need her to triumph over him. And then we see Kiryuu beating Saionji in the duel, right? But the thing that gets me is when Kiryuu wraps up the hand wound of Saionji's in the cloth, like when he wraps it up and then holds his hand, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but how am I not supposed to ship them when you're giving me all the fodder, when you're giving me all the setup, like him holding his hand and wrapping the scarf around it, like it's right there in front of us. And she's like, him, you mean Togo, right? And he's like, interrupting my fantasies, my daydreaming. And she's like, are you doing this just to compete with him? Are you using Himamiya to get at him? So again, she's starting to ask more and more questions, being like, are you just using Himamiya to, you know, be ahead of him somehow? She's like, is that fair? And he's like, well, you wouldn't even understand if I told you. You're not gay. You wouldn't understand. And she's like, well, try me. You wouldn't understand. With Anthe by my side, I will attain something eternal. And she's like, eternal? And he's like, correct. And it's the way I'm sorry. Correct me if I'm wrong, heterosexual men watching this video, the way that he just flicks his hand up on the window and scales it, I don't know. I'm grasping here, but I could be wrong. She told me that she too desired eternity. And so he's like, oh, we'll get it together. So Anthe apparently desires eternity. It's a desire that she has. Now, I'm assuming that she wrote that in the book. I'm assuming she wrote that in the exchange diary, that's where it came from. We don't get that confirmation, but why else would she say it? I'm assuming that she wrote back. Here's the part that's kind of messed up with that, though, if that's the case, is we know that whoever Anthe is engaged to, she goes along with whatever they say. So if when Mickey, you know, when she was like playing the piano for Mickey, she's like, well, I'll keep playing as long as Utena-sama says I can. And so Mickey was like, well, if I have the Rose Bride, she'll keep playing for me because she has to. And Utena, whenever she tells Anthe, hey, will you do this? Anthe will do it. So I'm wondering if when Saionji was engaged to Anthe and he said, I'm desiring eternity, I wonder if her saying that she desires eternity too was only because she was engaged to him and she was just agreeing. And he took that the wrong way. Because whenever Mickey and Utena were facing each other in the duel, and Mickey was like, yeah, Anthe's got my back no matter what. But then, because Utena was Anthe's betrothed, she was like, go Utena, beat him! And his whole worldview was shattered in that moment. And he realized, no, Anthe's not going along with him at all. She's just doing whatever Utena says is okay. So I'm wondering if that was the case, and it's given Saionji the wrong idea. And he seems like somebody who would instantly play with that, so I don't know. But anyway, so there's this rain, right? And the two of them are coming after their match in the rain on the bicycles. Gege Akutami, you know exactly what you're doing, bitch. They're coming in the rain. I love that the bandage that Saionji has over his hand is highlighted, and Saionji's holding both of their kendo sticks, and Kiryuu is the one driving, which you can interpret that to mean however you want to, but that's why I said to quit at the 10th match. So they kept playing each other and fighting over and over again. But I love both of their designs. I love that Kiryuu has the lavender tights, and then Saionji has the black tights. Like, they're the opposite colors are just mwah, right? I like that Saionji's pants have the little crown pockets. I'm like, what? What? But it seems like they both were going to the same school even then. So this Rose School isn't just something that popped into existence within the last so-and-so years. It's been around. So that's interesting to me, that it's something they've been going to school at for a while. He's like, you're only the only one good enough for sparring practice. So that one there, where Kiryuu was saying that there is a question of, was he using Saionji for just sparring practice? Here's my thing. I feel like Saionji caught feels. Saionji's caught feels and loves Kiryuu. But Kiryuu is only in it for Kiryuu. So Kiryuu is just doing whatever he can to satisfy his own agenda, whatever that may be. So was he just using Saionji for practice, or does he, in my heart of hearts, I think that Kiryuu has developed an attraction and a love for Saionji, which we'll talk about as this episode goes on. But of course he's not going to admit that. Of course he's not going to like let that be something in his heart. He's going to push that aside and be like, no, I'm using him. It's fine. I'm using him. I'm keeping him on near the student council because he needs to be used because he's a duelist. So, but we're going to talk more about this. I think it is interesting that Kiryuu recognizes the funeral. He recognizes the funeral service. And that shot of them on the hill with the giant cathedral in front of them, that's such a gorgeous shot. I love it. All the colors, everything. And then, of course, the Saionji's like, I wonder who died. And then Kiryuu's like, let's go check it out. And that's when they're like, did you see a girl nearby? A girl lost her parents in an accident today. We took our eyes off and she was gone. So they keep looking at her and they're like, you don't suppose she might have been spirited away, do you? Don't be stupid. So they're like, everybody's so superstitious, like spirited away. But Saionji plays it off as a joke, but Kiryuu suspects that she's in the cathedral. Now, why Kiryuu had the foresight and perception to go look for her in the cathedral when Saionji played it off? Has Kiryuu had something in his past that caused him to have trauma and grief as well, and that's partially led him to be the way that he is? Could be. We might find out next episode, or we might find out 20 episodes from now. Who knows? But Saionji is very innocent in this flashback. He's a very innocent character. He seems like he's playing the joke. He's being innocent. Kiryuu strikes me as someone that's gone through trauma and is repressing it. And then knowing that the girl is gone makes him think that she might have been in the cathedral. Now, the big question, of course, is why 3 coffins? Why 3 coffins? That is a big question. And again, we go back to her memory. Now, she's at the grave of her parents later on in this memory, so we're going to talk about that when we get there. Why were there 3 graves? Why were there 3 coffins? I don't know. This is the one aspect of the scene that, do I think that it has any ulterior or extra purpose? No. I think it's just stylistic because there's 3 coffins. It perfectly aligns with the cross in the window. It's a great stylistic motif. It's used again later on. That Kiryuu planned this all out, right? The fudge, or the end of the world did the fudge. So we don't know why there's the 3rd coffin. The girl speculates that she was supposed to die and be buried with them, but she wasn't, and she didn't. But then you would think the adults would mention something about it, like as they're walking away, but they don't. So for right now, I don't expect the show to ever give me an explanation of the 3rd coffin, but maybe it will. We don't know yet. We'll find that out, right? Maybe it will someday. We'll just have to wait and see. The point is that Kiryuu believes that she's in the coffin, and he opens it up to reveal that she is, right? Now, Saionji, I love Saionji's reaction because Kiryuu is not afraid to open up the coffin because he believes that he's correct. He's very assured of himself. He's very confident in himself. He knows this is the case. Saionji is terrified because he's like, you're opening up a coffin. What if there's a dead body? And he, being the emotional one, is like, no, stop it. Don't do it. And then it turns out that Utena's, or a girl's inside the coffin. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think that that speaks a lot for why Saionji is also upset at that memory, because in that moment, he wasn't cowardly, but he was afraid. He was afraid, and then it's one of those moments where if Saionji realizes that if it had just been him there, he never would have found her and he never would have talked to her or left that impression. He would have just been scared and walked out. And so he's kind of, it almost feels like he's ashamed of himself and how he acted in that moment. Whereas Kiryuu acted like this adult, mature character and found the girl and talked to her, right? So the show does weird things with hair color because it puts the character's face and features in black where you can't see them. But then it makes their hair a different color. And so this is Utena. This is Utena, right? And Kiryuu's like, oh yeah, they've all been looking for you. Are you telling anyone I'm in here? And he says, I won't tell anyone. And then he picks up her hair against all the pink roses. So Utena's in the one coffin. Now, of course, here's the thing. And what was confusing in the reaction is I thought that Saionji was telling this story to Utena. He is not. He's imagining all this in his head right now and thinking back. He goes through like an entire flashback in the span of 2 seconds in his brain. So he's not telling this story to Utena. So for all we know, Utena has no clue that it was Saionji and Kiryuu that found her. She has no clue that this has happened and that it was them. I'm sure she remembers it, but here's the thing. The vision of the prince that comes after has overshadowed that moment. She's forgotten about the coffin moment because she's too focused on the lavender-haired prince showing up afterwards and giving her the ring, right? That's what she's focused on. Okay. So she doesn't know that Saionji was the one that was with Kiryuu during this entire scene. So that explains a lot, right? Her back is to them. I want to make note, Kiryuu has some really freaking long nails, even for an elementary schooler. There ain't no nails here. I'm like, those nails are enviable. Why you got such long nails, sir? And then he's like, I always side with girls because I'm a gentleman. Now, is Kiryuu... Kiryuu is so coded in this show that reminds me of a character in a BL that doesn't want to admit they like guys. He's so coded. He's like, oh, I only side with girls, but yet he's not in a committed relationship with any of them. He's like, oh, I'm just a playboy who's just using girls on the side and everything, but he doesn't bring across that air either. It almost just feels like Kiryuu is just performing these roles. He's like performing as a gentleman. He's performing as a playboy. He's performing because he doesn't want to admit how he actually feels. And I think how he actually feels is that he likes Saionji, but he's afraid maybe that Saionji won't like him back, even though I think he would. And so he doesn't want to do that. So it almost seems like he pushes Saionji away because he doesn't want to admit that he actually has feelings for him that way, and instead is just covering it by pretending to like all these girls that he may or may not actually like. Maybe he's bisexual, who knows? But I feel like he's just like, well, I always side with girls because I'm a gentleman. That just feels like a very performative statement, right? At least to me. He reminds me a lot of 90s BL characters. He's the protagonist that doesn't realize he's gay until the third act, right? And then, of course, Saionji's like, well, why are you hiding in a place like this? And she says that she belongs there because there's 3 coffins, so why wouldn't she be there? It had to be meant for me. Who else could it be for? And then who? I mean, that is a fair question. Why have a 3rd coffin there if it wasn't meant for you? But it clearly wasn't. And then she says, it makes me sick. Being alive makes me feel sick. Awfully sick. And Kiryuu's just sitting there playing with her hair, right? Just sitting there being like, well, what do I say to her? What do we do? Because grief has made her feel sad to be alive. The loss of her family, it sounds like she has survivor's guilt. And she's like, well, I should just be dead like they are. And Kiryuu's trying to rationalize through that and be like, really, you think that? And so that made me wonder, like, does Kiryuu have survivor's guilt? Did he survive something and he feels the same way that she does? She's like, why do we keep on living when we're all going to die someday anyway? And he's like, why did I never notice that before today? And Saionji's just like, there's no such thing as something eternal, is there? So, in the quest for something eternal, so the something eternal, meaning that it doesn't die. And maybe Kiryuu is also looking for something that doesn't die. We don't exactly know about what he is looking for in this power, but we now know that Saionji, he wants the power to be on the same level as Kiryuu, who he kind of idolizes. We've known that he wanted power for a while, but now we get more explanation of what kind of power Saionji is wanting. And he just looks like a little deer there. He looks like a little baby deer, just looking all wide-eyed. And then that eternally is like, she's like, so don't bother. And that's when he drops the hair. She's like, I'll never leave this coffin. But someone will find you at some point. And if that happens, I'll find another coffin to hide in. And I'll stay by myself forever, alone in the dark. And Kiryuu seems very contemplative there. I feel like, again, one reason why he might like Utena is because he feels a connection to how she was then, to how Utena was. But Utena has been influenced by the prince, quote unquote, and that changed her views. So we're going to talk about this prince and Kiryuu and all this. So anyway, as they're leaving, Saionji's like, well, wait, aren't you worried she'll do something stupid if we leave her by herself? And Kiryuu's like, no, if you're worried, find something eternal and show her. And that's when, like, the bandage comes off. It's one of those moments where Kiryuu's like, what can we do for her? She says that she needs something eternal that won't die. He's like, can you show her that? Because I can't show her that. And if we can't give her what she wants, then what's the point of us trying to, like, patronize her? But then they talk about, you know, seeing the next day she'd left the coffin. And the look in her eyes made me feel uneasy. So she has the white rose on her little jacket there. And he's like, did you do something after we saw her yesterday? And he's like, no, nothing at all. He's like, but I was sure of it. He had to have shown her something eternal. So, it almost seems like Saionji believes that Kiryuu was maybe, and I'm not saying that Saionji believes Kiryuu's the one that gave her the ring, but I believe that he thinks that Kiryuu basically did what the prince did with the ring. He went back to her. He thinks that he went back to her and said something. Now, I don't think that Kiryuu went back to her and gave her the ring, but I think that Kiryuu knows the prince. I think that Kiryuu knows the prince and is in on this whole thing because Kiryuu has been one that has not dueled Utena. He does not seem interested at all in Anthe, but he is bound and determined to keep this student council going and these duels going. And I'm like, if you don't care about Anthe and getting the eternity that she wants or the power that she wants to revolutionize the world, then what's the point of having the student council? If you don't want to be a part of it, why are you so adamant that it keeps in place and that these people are a part of it? I think that Kiryuu knows the prince and that the two of them are in on this and that there's stuff that we don't know yet. And that Saionji knows that Kiryuu knows stuff that he doesn't know, and it's bothering him. He wants to get the power so that he can match Kiryuu and know what Kiryuu knows. He wants to be in the room where it happens. And he just can't be yet, so it's bothering him. He's stepping into a world beyond me. And he's like, I want to go to that castle floating in the sky so that I can get that eternity as well and catch up with him. And then he's like, well, you've also seen the floating castle, so it holds eternity. And he's like going on this tangent. He's like, and I'll go there with her. And he's like, and I'm not going to lose to Toga. I'm going to get on his level and figure out what's going on. And then he breaks the glass, which it's like, now you got property damage, Saionji. But yeah, he wants to catch up and be on Kiryuu's level and know what Kiryuu knows. He's like, on that note, Utena told me she met a prince when she was little. Then we go back to the student council. We don't get the student council like meeting. We don't get the Team Rocket greeting this time. And they're like, a prince. And he's like, yeah. He's like, she said that she came to this academy to see a prince that she met as a child. That girl's quite the romantic. Mm-hmm. He's like, a prince, huh? Now the question is, again, I say my theory is that Kiryuu knows the prince. I think he does. But he's playing with her. I feel like he's questioning, you know, I think it could be one of two ways. I think it's one of two ways. Either Kiryuu is in cahoots with the prince, which the conversation on the phone makes me think that. So he's in cahoots with the prince and knows about the prince and Utena together. And he's just teasing her and trying to make her question her own memories. So that's one possibility. Or another possibility is that he is convinced that he is the prince. That he is the prince. And that this whole thing that he wants to seduce Utena because he's in love with her, and Anthe is just a means to an end. Whatever. The only thing that makes me not think that second one, though, that makes me think that's a little more flimsy than the first option, is that he did not give her the ring that we know of. He didn't give her the ring, so when she's like, oh, the prince gave me this ring, it's not Kiryuu, so that's what makes me think he knows the prince and knows more than he's letting on about this scenario. Unless we're just in another situation with more unreliable narrators and he did give her the ring and she just couldn't remember correctly because she was like flooded with her own grief. I don't know, but maybe we'll find out. He's like, oh, I see. I feel like Kiryuu's whole deal is that he just likes causing trouble. He likes causing chaos. And so when he hears that she's all about this prince, he's like, well, I'll just mess with her and pose as this prince because it's not going to hurt me to do so. And it might get me some answers. So I don't know. But then we have the roses that we see at the end of the episode. And we see it from this ring shall guide you to me. And then she's like, it was undeniably the princess's first love. So yeah, she sees the roses that we see with her and Anthe later on. We're going to tie back around. But she believes that the prince was her first love. And there are the rose petals that we coincidentally see with her saving Anthe later on. Just gonna note that those are the same rose petals for both instances. I'm gonna be very curious when we finally figure out what the deal is with Anthe and the prince, and if they're the same person or if they're different and how they're connected. I know it's gonna be a while before we find that out, but I look forward to it. Could the ring the prince gave her be anything other than an engagement ring? Now, the line about her first love is an added line. So again, unreliable narrator. We're adding more to the story. And Utena's like, well, what do I do with all this information? She's like, we'll meet again, won't we? And then the iced sugared tea, Kiryuu like puts on her cheek to tease her, right? And she dashes back, and then he hands it to her, and he's like, oh, you look lonely hunched over there. And she's like, mind your own business. What could you be doing up here? And she's like, the castle, the floating castle you can see in the dueling arena. And then I want to make note that she's like, well, the castle, he doesn't seem to know about the castle, but I'm pretty sure he knows about the castle. But then he takes that soda and he does a Rin move from Free, where in Free, Rin takes the soda can, and I'm not going to do it with one hand because this is a glass and it'll like fall and smash everywhere. But he takes his finger and pops the tab with one hand while he's holding it with those nails. I'm going to say when Rin did it in Free, it was really hot, and it was here as well. Curse you, Kiryuu, for being attractive. Curse you. So yeah, and then he just does it like he's showing off to her, and she's like, am I supposed to be impressed by that? And he's like, well, the castle is where you'll meet your prince someday. So again, he seems to know things that we don't know. He knows the prince is up there. And she's like, well, bitch, why don't you tell us a few more things since you seem to know so much? And she's like, oh, someone talked, huh? And then she's blushing. And that's when he grabs her and brings her close to him. And the way he brings her close to him is kind of like the way that she brings Anthe close to her when she's pulling the sword out. Do I think that Kiryuu truly loves Utena? I don't know. A part of me says no. He's just using her to his own means. A part of me says maybe. Yes, possibly. Again, the same voice actor for Kiryuu plays another character in Skate the Infinity. And in that series, see, this is the thing. Because in Skate the Infinity, Kiryuu's voice actor plays another character who's very similar to Kiryuu. Very typecast. And that character in that series constantly makes advances and flirts with a character who's kind of like Longa in that series, if I'm being honest. And in that series, he flirts with this character nonstop. But the reality is, he doesn't really like that character. He says he does. He might be attracted to them, but he doesn't really like that character. The reality is, he really likes this character that he pesters over here, but that is loyal to him. And that kind of is tsundere in a way, and wants, and kind of, you know, doesn't acknowledge his relationship, but kind of wants to acknowledge the relationship. Yeah, so the dynamic between Saionji, Kiryuu, and Utena is the exact same as these three characters in Skate the Infinity. It's very, very similar. And so that's what makes me think that he's just putting on that he might be attracted to Utena. Maybe. Who knows? But does he love her? No. I think that he knows that this is all to stir the pot and to get her closer to that prince that he may know, and to just, there's an agenda that he has, and she's a piece of that agenda. But that pose, the pose of him grabbing her, I really like it. I would root for her and Kiryuu if I wasn't already rooting for Utena and Anthe and Saionji and Kiryuu, and thought Kiryuu was kind of a bitch. So, Utena, these hoes ain't loyal. And by these hoes, I mean Kiryuu. He says that prince was a guy like me, was he not? And Kiryuu seems to be playing with this idea with her memory that she doesn't quite remember. And he's like, well, do you think that prince could be me? And she's like, no. She's like, leave me alone. She's like, you're clearly not him. Quit messing with my brain. Quit screwing around with me. She's like, I don't like it. And he's like, don't make me laugh. Yeah, he's just enjoying this. He's enjoying being a shitster in this moment. Meanwhile, I was wondering whose office this was, but it's Saionji with the blinds. And then Saionji gets a letter from the end of the world, which we find out Kiryuu forged. That bitch. He's committing mail fraud. Kiryuu's committing mail fraud. Here's the thing that's crazy. How do we not know that some of these other end of the world letters weren't forged by Kiryuu? If he's done it once, how do we know he's not done it before? Also, another way that I know that Saionji is into Kiryuu, even though they're not friends and he's just a rival, on his desk is a portrait of the two of them, like smiling side by side playing kendo. You don't just have portraits like that hanging around. But then he's told to take Anthe to the castle to show up, and the castle's going to fall. And he's like, this is my chance to get to eternity. I wonder, my thing is, Saionji drags Anthe there. And then, if we are correct in this, we are assuming, we don't know for sure, but we're assuming based on the coffin that looks exactly like the one, where these rose coffins were just lying at, again, that's kind of like that's the part of the episode that you kind of have to suspend disbelief, because you're like, what, did Kiryuu go to the trouble to find the manufacturer of Utena's parents' coffins and have them bring in an extra one so that they could prop up Anthe inside of it like Utena was when they met them? And the thing about it is, he was doing that. I'm sure he orchestrated Utena going there, but he knew Saionji was going to be there too. So he basically did that to just torture Saionji as well. And I'm like, or maybe he was trying to bring Utena's memories back. We're going to talk about it later when we get back to it. But I'm like, you have to suspend your disbelief for that, because I think it's just a stylistic choice. Also, where was pillars and roses and all of this? Was it all a mass hallucination because it all seems to be in Saionji's head? We're going to talk about that in a hot second. We're going to talk about that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, my question is, can Kiryuu get into the castle? Because why? Did he orchestrate? It almost seems like he wanted to get Saionji out of the way. He wanted to get Saionji out of the way. Because Saionji is persistent. He's persistent, and he's not going to quit trying to get Anthe to go up into the castle with him until he basically destroys himself. And Kiryuu knows that because he knows Saionji. So, two things here. One, I was wondering, is Kiryuu even allowed to go into the castle? Because Kiryuu has a ring. He should be able to, like anybody else. We've only just seen him on the outside looking in with the opera glasses. But he has a ring, so he should be able to go inside. So that shouldn't be an issue. And he should be a duelist, so that can't be it. My thing is, I feel like he wanted to get Saionji out of the way. He knew that Saionji was going to keep on trying to interfere and get back with Anthe and keep dueling Utena, and he possibly could end up hurting Utena. And it seems like Kiryuu might be in cahoots with the prince, so he wants to get Utena to the castle and to the prince for reasons. Maybe the prince has made a deal with Kiryuu. Maybe the prince is like, if you can get me Utena, that girl that you know from all long ago, I know her too, if you can get her to me, then I'll give you a little share of the power. And Kiryuu's like, okay, sure, I got nothing else to lose. So maybe that's why he's in cahoots with him. I don't know. Maybe this prince is not a nice person. Maybe that's going to be the lesson, is that Utena and Anthe are going to end up together because the prince is a dick. We don't know. We know nothing about him. We know that he gave her the ring and she thinks of him as this white knight, but that's going to lead to the discussion here in a hot second. So I'm getting ahead of myself. There's so much to talk about with this episode, but I feel like he wanted to get Saionji out of the way. So we're going to lure Saionji to get Saionji to get Anthe, take her to the dueling spot, but then I'm going to take Anthe with me, knock you out. I'm going to call Utena, tell her to come over. She's going to come because curiosity is going to kill the cat. She's going to see Saionji. She's too nice to let him just stay there. And so, or maybe he was planning on it could be either way. Either she left him there or she brought him. And either way, it was going to get Saionji riled up to the point where he would make a mistake, and then Kiryuu would jump in like a white knight to take the blow and serve multiple purposes, which we'll get to. But I'm just like, oh my God, the elaborate planning of all of this, it's so much. It's so much at once. I'm going to go back through this, don't you worry, and when we get to this. But then we have our Greek choir, who we not only get to see hands for, which is awesome, but this is the most lucid and easy to understand they've been this entire time. They've been speaking in limericks and just weird rhymes and things that haven't quite totally made sense. Like, you kind of get the gist, but you're like, no, it is crystal clear in this episode what they are saying. And I'm like, huh. So they start talking about UFOs, flying saucers, which in itself, the UFOs, we think of aliens, we think of spaceships. It's already like a meta reference because the flying saucers are literal plates, right? They're not really flying saucers. So that's one layer of it. But they bring about the idea of UFOs, of fairies, of Santa, and of princes, which this is the most important part of it. Princes on white horses. They're all an illusion. I'm like, oh shit, the Greek choir's getting real quick. So yeah, also it's the same women. They're like, oh, it's just a shooting star. And they're like, no, it's a UFO. And they're like, well, no, it was zigzagging. And they're like, well, that's just your imagination. Again, calling into mind that sometimes your eyes play tricks on you and your memory isn't quite what it is. And being like, well, you think it's UFO, but it's actually this. You think it's one thing, but it's actually another. And saying, well, yeah, it was just a zigzagging shooting star. There's no way UFOs exist. And they're like, oh no. Like, it happened when I was in kindergarten. And they're like, what happened? I found out that Santa Claus doesn't exist. So it talks about like when you're a child, as you grow up, you start figuring out the things that are fake in the world. And then the hands come up and make the X through Santa. And they're like, but it's all right. I get it now. And they're like, get what? They're like, wizards, fairies, and princes on white horses, and kind-hearted friends. All of them are only found in fantasy. And the two girls' heads go back to back, which makes me wonder if we're going to see those two girls in the future, if we're going to see all of them. But the princes as well as kind-hearted friends are all part of fantasy. That makes me believe that regardless of this prince Utena fell in love with, regardless of him giving her the ring, regardless of what he's told her, my theory is that she's going to figure out that that's all a bunch of baloney, that he's not the prince that she thought he was, which is going to give her an existential crisis because she's been trying to imitate him this whole time. Or maybe she's had this all inside of her all along, and he's going to prove to her that that's the case. But the kind-hearted friends bit, to me, applies to Kiryuu, because Saionji believes that Kiryuu is his friend, and Kiryuu mocks that friendship at the end of the episode on the phone. So to me, I feel like Kiryuu has this hollowness in him where he doesn't think real friendship exists. And I really want Saionji by the end of this series to like be like, no, I'm your friend, and it to be this big sappy mess. I want sappy mess. I'll take it. I'll take it so hard. But yeah, they say, but it's all right. We get it now. We know, at least let myself keep believing in UFOs. So they're like, the cruel, it's basically this whole entire speech was about the cruel world and reality, and that all of these things that you think the world's made of are lies, but just let me close my eyes and keep on believing in them. And that just seems to be Kiryuu. Like, let me go on believing this stuff exists when I know it's all a lie. I'm like, I was just so freaking good. Yes. And then they're like, it's pretty tricky, right? And then one of the plates drops and they're like, oops, we broke them. Oh my God. So yeah, I liked that the phone rings. And Utena, I like that the phone rings and she's like, oh, hello, East Dorm, second floor. These are called landlines. We had those back in the 90s before people had cell phones. And that's when they're like, him and me and Anthe will be spirited away tonight. And she's like, what? And so that was specifically said, the spirited away business, because Kiryuu knew she was going to like meet up with Saionji and then say the line spirited away. And that was going to get Saionji to realize it was Kiryuu and follow her into the castle. We didn't get the song this time. Crazy. No lyrics needed. It was bonkers enough as is. So then, of course, Saionji drags Anthe, being like, tonight we'll be able to enter the castle and hold eternity. And Anthe's like, no. She's like, we have to have a duel declaration. Anthe's like, there are rules. We have to follow specific criteria to go there. And, of course, she doesn't know that Kiryuu's forged the letter, which makes me wonder if she, like, has some kind of internal notification of the duel declarations, or if she knows somehow, and because she wasn't notified, she's like, well, this has to be a lie then. The one thing about Saionji's character, I love Saionji. Like, this episode has made me really feel for him, and I want to root for Saionji. The only thing I want Saionji to do is to stop hitting Anthe. Like, please stop hitting Anthe. We get it. We get your inner turmoil, sir. We get your struggles. But could you not abuse Anthe anymore? Could you not smack her anymore? Like, I don't think that's necessary. It's really not. And he's like, the one to attain eternity with you will be me. And now it makes sense. Like, he doesn't love Anthe. He doesn't care about her. He just knows that she's his ticket to catching up with Kiryuu. And if anybody's going to obtain the right to catch up with Kiryuu, it's going to be him. And I think that at that point, that's when Kiryuu's like, okay, you need to be out of the picture for now, because you need to, like, they're going to expel him. He's going to face expulsion. They're going to get him out of the way. Meanwhile, I do like that Utena's nice enough to just, like, Like Saionji could have drowned Kiryuu. Do you even care? I guess not. Maybe he knew that she was going to come and save him. I also love that Utena's version of CPR is just to smack the shit out of him. The 90s were a different time. 90s were a much different time. But yeah, she's just like makes him wake up and he's like, oh my God. And she's like, where's Himamiya? And she's like, you can't take her back without beating me in a duel, right? And she's like, someone said she'd get spirited away. And that's when he's like, oh my God, it was Kiryuu. He's like, spirited away. And that's when he knows who did it. And so they both go in, the door's left open. And he's like, well, that's impossible. And then they both go to the top of the tower, the stairs, and there is a massive red rose with a coffin in the middle. Now, at this point, my question is, why? And inside the coffin, there is a symbol, and it's like a rose, but there's like a cross inside or a star. I feel like we're going to have that symbol come up again later, right? Because it's split into 4. And Saionji's like, oh my God. My question is, why doesn't Utena respond to it? It's like, don't open the coffin. And again, I love that it calls back to Saionji screaming for it to stop as a child, but he can't stop it now, and it's the blue roses. There's no such thing as something eternal, is there? Which kind of makes it makes me wonder if Saionji in this moment realized that it's like the coffin opening is like Pandora's box opening. It's like discovering that there are no such thing as fairies. It's like the moment that you discover that it wasn't a UFO. The moment that coffin opens could possibly be the moment Saionji realized she wasn't going to get you to catch up with Kiryuu. This is not the way it's going to work. And I wonder if that was the case, and that him just being afraid of the coffin opening was that realization hitting him in that moment. Because the coffin opens up and there she be. And she's like tucked away in there with all the roses. And she has like the little crown and everything on her head. And Utena's like, hey, oh, it's Himamiya. And then he runs after her. But then it's like the coffin and stuff are on springs. My thing is that Utena did not respond to the coffins. And clearly she was the one hiding in them, right? But she's more worried about rescuing Anthe in this moment. So, okay, Tenjo and Toga. Yep, Tenjo is Saionji. And then they're in the castle and she's like, what is going on here? What is the point of this? And she's like, well, I'm not going to question this. I'm just going to go save Himamiya. So maybe her being distracted by needing to save Himamiya kept her from focusing on the coffin. That was my other question in the episode, is that she doesn't seem to remember the hiding in the coffin at all. Or that has been purged from her mind, which if you suffer a big trauma as a kid, yeah, sometimes when you suffer big traumas, you forget about things. So maybe she did forget about it. Maybe she didn't, maybe that moment didn't stick with her. That's a really good note about memory, because sometimes things that we think are really insignificant or not the focal point of that memory, for other people they are. So in the past, Saionji really focused and remembers that coffin moment because it was a moment where he felt himself falling behind Kiryuu, and Kiryuu was in a world that was different than his. I think that was the realization Saionji had in that moment with Utena in the coffin, that he was behind Kiryuu and Kiryuu was on another level that he wasn't on. And that's the moment it clicked, right? For Utena, in that moment, during that time period, her in the coffin is not what she remembers. It's what happens afterwards at the graveyard when she meets the prince. So maybe she met the prince after they left and before they come back the next day, because that uneasy look that she had that Saionji remembers, maybe that was because the prince, and Kiryuu knows that it was. And Saionji's realizing that Kiryuu's in on something he doesn't know about. That's just my guess. That's just what I'm thinking of. But that's the only way I can explain her not really remembering the coffins or mentioning it. So then, yeah, parts of the castle start to crumble. But the thing is, he says the castle's coming down. He starts to laugh, thinking that, like, into the world, here I am. like, grant me eternity. But this all seems to be an illusion. Like, the castle crumbles, she jumps to go after Anthe, and the castle spire comes down onto Saionji, and I was like, well, is he dying? Is he going to die at this point? But no, instead what's happened is it almost seems like either this is all an illusion orchestrated by Kiryuu and the prince, or because Anthe was brought to the castle under false pretenses and Saionji and them showed up, it's like a punishment. The castle starts to crumble to show you the punishment if you do something that's out of line. I feel as if it's an illusion that Kiryuu and the prince are in on, right? Because she, like, leapfrogs her way to Anthe, and in the white roses that Utena had on her person in the flashback, she goes to Himamiya, and that's when the rose petals disperse and she grabs her hand, right? And she grabs Utena. Again, same rose petals, same instance as when we had Utena talking about her first love. So again, I'm like, the prince, Utena, Anthe, how are the prince and Anthe connected? How are they not connected? Are they the same person? Are they different people? Did Utena see what she thought was a prince in her mind and it was Anthe the whole time? And she just didn't realize it? I can't rely upon Utena's memories because they're not reliable. But yeah, regardless, then the castle's fine. Everything's great. There's a red light and a blue light up there, and a green light, and all different kind of rainbow lights going on. And he's like, what the hell was that? Exactly! Saionji, you're asking a question we're all asking. What the hell was that? And then meanwhile, it feels like Utena is trying to snap her out of it. Now, the question, of course, is, was there a coffin all along? Was there a coffin to begin with? Did Utena leapfrog her way to saving Himamiya from the coffin and it burst into rose petals, defying the laws of physics as we know it? Was it magic? Was it the power of Dios? Or was Anthe just there and the whole coffin business and everything else, was that all just in Saionji's head? We may never know. We may never know. That's a very good question. We may never know the answer to it. But Saionji's like, I'm the one who was supposed to save her from the coffin this time. Again, that ties back to this idea that Saionji feels guilty, that he was cowardly and that he was afraid and that he didn't reach out to help Utena back then. He feels ashamed that Kiryuu's the one that reached out to help, but he didn't. And so in this point, he's like, I'm the one that was supposed to reach out and do the right thing. And I couldn't do it again like I couldn't do it back then. And he's like, the castle said to hold eternity, to power the revolutionize the world. That's going to be mine. The one who will go to that castle with Anthe is me. And so, yeah, meanwhile, Utena's trying to help her wake up. And she's like, what exactly happened? And of course, Anthe doesn't know. She's like, well, truthfully, I don't really know. And I'm like, damn it, Anthe. And that's when she realizes that Saionji, again, coming up from behind with his hands up in the air, is about to strike Utena. And we get that sign of the cross in the church. And Kiryuu is in the middle. Just like before. And he strikes him, in the back. I love the shot of Utena being like, oh shit, and Saionji being, oh shit, and then of course, Kiryuu gets like a little shallow wound on his back, because of course he does. And of course he lands in her arms, and she's like, Toga, why? And he's like, well, your prince was a guy like me, was he not? Now, Tina, of course, feels sad about this, but she also looks like she feels confused, like, but are you my prince? I don't know about that. I don't think Kiryuu is her prince, but I think that the other prince has convinced him to tell her that, to confuse her, so what do we get out of that? And of course, Saionji is like, oh my god. He's like, oh my god, I just sliced my best friend's back, and he's like, why do you always get in the way? Why'd you do this? And he's like, well, I told you. I always side with ladies because I'm a gentleman. the shade, like breaking Saionji's heart. The bitch, the bastard. So then we cut to the bed scene where there's 3 women, no less. No, there's 4 women. There's one woman behind the bed that looks like she's nude. There's another woman leaning over the bed frame with her arms around him as his like chest is bandaged up. There's another woman in his lap, and there's another woman there. Like, they're all just like draped over him, the womanizer. And he says, "Oh, it's me. Yes. The letter Saionji received tonight was from me," so he forged it. I'm like, he's saying this in front of all these girls, so they must not know what he's talking about. And he's like, "Right, in your name." So he's like, "I wrote the letter in your name. Sorry about that." And he's like, "No, it was just a shallow wound. It's okay. Let's just say it was something of a performance." Yeah, it's all just a performance. It was just him saving her was a performative act. And he's like, "Yes, Saionji is facing expulsion." Like, yeah, he's getting exposed. Like, getting expelled for, like, attacking a student. And then he's like, "Oh, nonsense. Only a fool believes in friendship." Because I'm sure the person on the other line was like, "Well, isn't he, like, your best friend?" He's like, "No." So, what the fudge? I'm like, I want Kiryuu and Saionji to be endgame. I want Kiryuu to, like, come clean by the end of this series, and I want Saionji to be like, I want Saionji to grab him by the head and be like, "Look, bitch, just own up to all of this and explain yourself." And I need them to come together. If we can have Utena and Anthe get together, we can have Saionji and Kiryuu get together. I see no problem in this. I see no problems. Oh my god. And I've talked for an hour and a half about this episode. This episode was amazing. This episode was great. This is my favorite episode so far. Favorite episode so far. Bar none. So excited. Rule of 9 for Utena. And with this, next week we're going to be a 1/4 of the way through the series. 25% in. So many questions. Kiryuu is, if we're doing the, you know what? If we're doing the 4-act structure, I ran out of room on Whiteboard-kun. Let me see. Do I have, where is that? There we go. Grab myself here. I'm going to make a little space here. Sorry, Whiteboard-kun. We have so much room here. But okay. 4-act structure in Japan, Japanese literature. Sometimes Western literature often follows a 3-act structure. So we're going to put that over here. In a 3-act structure, you have your beginning, where you introduce all your characters, you set up what the conflict is. Then you have your middle, and that's usually where the conflict goes into play. Usually your middle act ends at, like, your characters are at their direst points. Your characters are at their worst or direst straits. And then the end is when everything, like, builds to a climax and you get resolution, right? That's a 3-act structure. And if we were looking at, the appropriate numbers here, I'm not a mathematician, so I gotta do this right. That would be 13 episodes each. So your beginning would be episodes 1 through 13. Then you would have 14 through 27. And then you'd have 28 through 39. And that would be it. And then your movie, I treat the movie like it's separate because the movie is its own thing. So that would be kind of your situation. So we're not quite to the 3-act structure, the end of the beginning. But if you're doing a traditional Japanese structure of a 4-act structure, it's a little bit different, right? So let me get this right. Okay, so if you're doing a 4-act structure, you have your first act, which is to introduce everyone, which we have essentially done that. We've introduced every character that I think are going to be a major character, except for the prince, but he seems to be the most mysterious, so we're not going to get into that yet. And then your second act is when you have your conflict, and that's when all your characters kind of do what they do in the middle. They all start to work together here. The third act in a Japanese structure is where you have the twists and turns. And that's where things take, like, they go into crazy town. and everything goes to hell in a handbasket, and you build towards the climax. And then your fourth is your climax and resolution. And that's where we're at. Now, for 39 episodes, it does not evenly divide into 4, but if we counted the movie in addition, then episode 10 would be officially the end of Act 1, which is next week. And judging from the preview, it seems like somehow Nanami is a duelist. Now, how that's going to work, I don't know. We're going to see about that. Real quick, looking at that preview again, since we have a week, I want to go back here. So I actually paused it because they showed Saionji with an arm sling, and I'm like, your back got injured, sir, not your arm, you big faker. But yeah, he's like, oh, Toga got hurt trying to protect me. And he's like, oh, it's not your fault, Utena-sama. And of course, it shows her being slapped against the roses, so I'm curious. I'm assuming that's from Nanami, judging from the preview. And Nanami seems to think it's her fault. And so then there's this party, and it's for Toga's birthday, and I'm like, what's happening? And we're going to his birthday party. Why is Nanami a duelist? Who knows? I want to go on the record and say that Nanami's outfit with the black and the yellow sleeves, I want it. I need it. It's the most fashionable thing I've seen. But everybody's there. What is happening? And it shows her as a duelist. Now, she doesn't have a ring on in the preview, so we're going to see what is up with that. Did she just fashion her own outfit? Probably. But yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm so excited for next week. I cannot even explain to y'all, but we'll officially be a fourth of the way through the series next week and potentially moving into the second act of the series, and I cannot wait. But Saionji and Kiryuu, I'm rooting for them. I don't know if it's going to work out, but I'm rooting for them anyway. Anyway, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts down below. Your non-spoilery thoughts. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to not give me answers, but just be patient with me. I'll get there, I swear. Anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more of Revolutionary Girl Utena. Bye.